everyone. Today we're going to be doing a talk on the mind-body connection and looking at some of the ways we can heal emotionally. Yesterday when we did our talk, we looked at the physical aspects of health. We looked at building a really solid foundation of health, and we also saw how really good quality health, really high level, high energy, vibrant health is more than just the physical body. We looked at the 5 aspects of health. So there was, of course, the physical body, but there was also the emotional body or the mind connection. There's our social network and support system that's very important. There's the environment we live in, and that can include our home, but it can also include the chemicals and personal care products that we use in our environment, and also our spirituality or our connection to something greater than ourselves. And it's when we have those 5 aspects well balanced and integrated that we get the best feeling of being healthy. It's not enough to just look after the physical body and think that everything's going to be okay. It's not. I'm sure we know plenty of people out there that really obsess about their physical body, but they live very limited fear-based lives because of that, and that affects their overall health. To me, health is more than just the physical body. The mind and body are actually one and the same. And when we look into ancient medicines like Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine, they have one word to describe it. They call it the body-mind, one word. In our culture, in orthodox medicine, we tend to compartmentalise everything. We look at the body as separate compartments right through. When we have a problem with the kidney, orthodox medicine often doesn't take into account the relationship between the kidney and the lungs, the kidney and the skin, the kidney and the digestive system, or even the kidney and the emotions and feelings that we have day to day. So even in naturopathic medicine, we will often separate the mind and the body, whereas in the ancient traditions we never did. So when we look at healing, when we're trying to heal the body, we can't separate. We need to look at the mind and body as one holistic, singular entity. And that's how we need to approach our healing, with more, again, than just the physical body. I've written a quote up here on the board that goes back a long, long way. The organs weep the tears the eyes refuse to shed. And most people can grasp that concept, that if we suppress, if we push emotions down, if we don't validate them, acknowledge them and understand them, then those thought patterns, those emotions, can damage organs or systems in our body. So we've known this for a long, long time, but science is just starting to prove this. And even though we don't need the scientific proof, it certainly makes for very interesting reading as they discover more and more about how our thoughts and feelings affect our physicality. There's people that have done a lot of research in this area, people like Louise Hay, who wrote a book many years ago called You Can Heal Your Life, where she outlines a lot of diseases and disorders that seem to manifest when we hold certain thought patterns or reoccurring beliefs, limiting belief patterns, and what comes out in the body because of those thoughts. Another lady is Annette Noontil, who wrote a book called Your Body is a Barometer of Your Soul. And again, she puts together a lot of thought patterns and diseases and disorders of the body. Now, a lot of people look at those and they can grasp the concept, but they don't think that it's particularly scientific. Now, a lot of research did go into creating those books, and there's a lot of other researchers that have done great work in that area as well. But a lot of people don't understand how our thoughts actually affect our body. They see that because there was a lot of intuition put into these books and into that type of research, that it's not valid at all. So they don't understand the connections and they dismiss it all as a little bit new age, a bit too out there, and they might be able to grasp the concept, but they haven't integrated it into their physical reality. So every thought we think actually creates substance within our body. Every thought we think. When we think a thought, it doesn't just float through our mind and then just flow out into the ether. It is actually creating neuropeptides in our brain, small chains of amino acids that then travel throughout our body to target tissue and create a response from the thoughts that we think. So no thought just happens and doesn't have an effect. So every thought creates substance within our body. And when we understand that, we might be able to understand a bit better about how we can heal by using our thought patterns. It's a very powerful thing to do. Now, when we have thoughts going through our mind, often we don't notice a physical reaction. But there is one type of thought we think where we can see a very obvious reaction happening with our body, and that is the thought form of fear. Fear, most of the time, is nothing more than our thoughts. There's often nothing scary actually happening. It's our imagination, it's our projection of what could happen. We visualise an event as it may turn out, and then we have a reaction in response to that. So most of the time, fear is nothing more than just a thought. Now, if we get woken up by a loud noise at 2 o'clock in the morning, we might immediately go into that fearful thought. We might think, somebody's in my house, they're stealing my television, or someone's breaking into my house. And that fearful thought will then create substance within our body that will then travel throughout our body, and it will create a reaction. In this instance, the target tissue for that thought is our adrenal glands. So our adrenal glands will then, in response to the thought, release hormones. Those hormones will have a very big physical change in our body as we move into fight or flight. What will happen is that our heart rate will speed up, our breathing will increase, we might break out into a sweat. Our digestive system will basically shut down, and a lot of the blood flow will move from our inner organs and go to our heart, our lungs and our muscles, ready for fight or flight. Our liver will dump glucose into our bloodstream for energy. The hairs on the back of our neck might stand up. Our senses become very alert. And all of these changes happened because of nothing more than a thought. So if we can understand the connection between that type of thought and the reaction we have in our body, it's not so much of a stretch to think that other thoughts that we have, that we think regularly, can also have an impact on our body. It just may not be as obvious as the fear response. We know that if we have that fear response day in, day out, year in, year out, we will damage our body. We know that having that stress or that fear reaction in our body can lead to cardiovascular disease, to cancer, to type 2 diabetes, ulcerative colitis, stomach ulcers, rheumatoid arthritis. A lot of degenerative diseases are brought on or exacerbated by that response. So we can see very clearly in that instance how our thoughts affect our body. So when we have other thoughts and other reoccurring thought patterns, we can understand how they may affect our body, but much more subtly than the fearful thought. Now, when we have reoccurring or negative thoughts going through our mind, usually it's not just a couple of times a day. It's often thousands upon thousands of times a day we have a similar thought pattern reoccurring or going through our mind. So if we're sitting there thinking something day in, day out, like I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm useless, I hate myself, not only is that going to create substance that moves throughout our body and affects it, those thoughts also create the reality around us. Because out of the thoughts we think, we make choices and decisions. Out of those decisions we take actions, and those actions we take determine the type of life we live. So our thoughts are all powerful. When we're looking at those thoughts going through our mind, I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm useless, I hate ourselves, again, what we do reinforces those thoughts, and those thoughts reinforce the actions that we take out there in the world and the type of life we live. Those thoughts will determine the type of relationships we have, how we deal with our spouse, with our children, with our partner, with our family, with the lady at the checkout at the supermarket, our work colleagues. It affects every relationship around us. It also affects the decisions we make around what food we eat, whether we exercise or not, what type of books we read or don't read, what type of magazines we pick up, whether we do further education or not, what type of movies we see, what type of television programs we watch, whether we develop ourselves personally or spiritually. and whether we have a greater purpose to our life. And all of those things are determined by the thoughts that we think. So if we're fat and ugly and useless and hate ourselves, we don't give a damn if we sit down to a 5-litre tub of ice cream every night and watch Big Brother. So our life becomes a reflection of what we think, and those thoughts are all powerful. And we'll talk more about that area a bit later. One lady that's done a lot of research in this area, or one scientist I should say, is Dr. Candace Pert. Dr. Pert wrote a book called The Molecules of Emotion. And she really brought forward a lot of information about the mind-body connection. Originally, what Dr. Pert discovered was called the opiate receptor on a cell. Now, in our body, we have trillions upon trillions of cells. And we have a myriad of different molecular and chemical reactions happening in our body day in, day out, every second of the day. Now, on the surface of a cell, we have what are called receptors. Now, a receptor is basically a communication gateway between the inside and the outside of the cell. We have molecules that fit into receptors almost like a key into a lock. And originally we did think it was a key into a lock type of situation, but now through the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, we're understanding that it's more like a radio signal or some type of electromagnetic signal, and an antenna picking up that signal. Now, when a drug company is trying to create a drug to make a certain function happen in the body, what they're trying to do is create a molecule as close to the original as possible so that it will lock into a certain receptor and cause a certain change in function in the body. When they get it right, they get a drug that works really well. It has the effect that they're looking for. When they get it a bit wrong, what they have there is a drug that, yes, fits to that receptor, but also fits into another dozen receptors that they didn't want to target, and that causes side effects. So what Dr. Pert discovered was the opiate receptor on a cell. And opiates are more of a feeling than anything else. They are a euphoric, a blissful, a happy, high type of feeling. And what they discovered was that there were receptors for opiates, not just on the cells in our brain where they expected to find them, but they found these receptors in cells right throughout the body, and they were heavily concentrated in our digestive tract. So when we are feeling that euphoric feeling, our own natural endorphin hit, our digestive tract is feeling that as well. And she was one of the first to really start to prove how our feelings are felt within our physical body, so that you can't separate one from the other. There was also a lot of research done on the immune system, and that's a whole area called psychoneuroimmunology. And what they also found was that there were receptors for different emotional states on every white blood cell of our immune system. For example, depression was one that they were researching quite heavily. And they found that when we are depressed and lethargic and don't give a damn and don't want to get out of bed, our immune system is actually feeling the same way. It's depressed and lethargic, doesn't give a damn, it doesn't want to get going. And in a physical way, we can really see this. When someone is very depressed, their immune system doesn't work well. They are more prone to colds and flus, their wounds don't heal properly, and they don't fight off infections very well. So we can see directly there that there's a very strong correlation between our thought patterns and the way we feel and the way our body works, how it heals, and how it responds to different stimulus from our thoughts. There are two words that I will use interchangeably during this talk, and most people do use them interchangeably, but I'd like to just define two words, and just so that you can understand there's two different meanings that we can gauge, and that is the words feeling and emotions. Now, Neale Donald Walsch, in his Conversations with God books, describes feelings as being the language of our soul. And when he talks about that, what they're talking about is that feelings are our truth, They are our higher self, our inner knowing. If you'd like to call it guidance, you could call it that. But also our feelings are actually physical. We will feel them within our body. Emotions, however, are what's left over after we feel those feelings and then analyse what they should or shouldn't be, determined by those negative thoughts, our limiting belief patterns, what society thinks, what our peer group thinks and what our family thinks. So often our emotions are more of a mental exercise. They're not necessarily our truth. So our feelings are very, very physical and we'll feel them within our body. Emotions, again, can be an analysis of those feelings and a determination of what they should or shouldn't be, rather than our truth. There's one lady that wrote a beautiful book on this subject called The Art of Effortless Living by Ingrid Barchi. And she there describes how often in today's society we cut off from the sensations in our physical body. We live in our head and we become numb from the head down. But our physical body will give us answers, will be able to give us the truth about what we're truly feeling in a situation. So if we ignore it, that message will get louder and louder until it's banging us over the head so that we have to pay attention. I'd just like to read a little bit out from Ingrid, just a couple of things she says about that emotional state. She says, the more we get in touch with our emotional lives, the more we get in touch with our bodies. And that's not surprising. Our emotions are nothing but energy moving through our bodies. Emotions or feelings are visceral sensations that express our organic reactions to the world. The depth of our feeling life measures the depth of our life force. And if we judge, contain or repress our feelings, we repress our life force. She also says, learning to feel our emotional bodies helps us become physically and emotionally healthy and authentic. We learn to feel our emotional bodies quite easily and naturally by getting in touch with and listening to the feelings of our bodies without judgment. And so often that's what we do. We judge those feelings and therefore we misinterpret the truth underneath that. Now, because we often teach what we need to learn, I experienced this quite strongly only a few weeks ago, and I thought it was a great example to be able to share with you about the difference between feelings and emotions, because it's very easy for us to get caught up in the emotion rather than the truth. Several weeks ago, I had a gentleman that I massage regularly contact me to book in for a massage. Now, over the last several months when he had been contacting me, his contact via email or text had become rather flirtatious and a bit suggestive. And I felt quite uncomfortable with that, but I did ignore it until a Tuesday morning a couple of weeks ago when I got an email that I would consider was quite inappropriate. Now, when I got that message, I had a true feeling. My stomach clenched up, I felt nauseous, my chest tightened, I couldn't breathe properly, and I had these waves of anxiety washing over me. Now that I would call a true feeling. That was physical. I felt it within my body. Now my head got involved, and it looked at that feeling and said, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. Maybe he talks to a lot of women that way and that's just his manner. Maybe I should just let it go. He's always fine when he comes in for a massage. Just book him in and keep the peace. And so therefore all of my beliefs about pleasing people, about doing the right thing, all came into play, and therefore that feeling that I had got twisted by my emotions, and I was ready to ignore the message that I got and book him in for a massage. Then I remembered the talk I do every morning, and I thought, hang on, I'm not listening to that true feeling. My true feeling said, I'm uncomfortable with this situation. And therefore I had to honour that and do something about it. And for me that wasn't easy, because most people find confrontation rather difficult. So what I did do was ring up this gentleman and take responsibility for the situation myself. So there are ways of honouring our feelings, and that is by not blaming and judging, taking responsibility for ourselves and for our response to situations that come up that we're uncomfortable with. So I did call him and I said, my interpretation of the communications is that there is a flirtatious undertone that I'm not comfortable with, and you will have to find another massage therapist. Now, by doing that, I didn't, again, blame or judge. I took responsibility for it and said it's my interpretation, but I honoured my feeling, which was that I was uncomfortable and needed to do something about that situation. Now, that gentleman actually was rather embarrassed. He didn't mean anything by it, but in those circumstances, we don't know how our true response and how honouring what we truly feel affects other people. Now, we're not responsible for that, but by holding our own truth and holding our ground, we may be teaching other people small things that they need to learn. This gentleman may now look at the way he interacts with women, and he may question that, and he may understand that his behaviour in communicating with other people may not have been quite appropriate. He may revise that, I don't know. But I've never had a very true, clear, physical feeling lead me in the wrong direction. We can still question it, but we need to understand what that questioning is about, and we need to make sure that we're still honouring the truth that we're feeling in our bodies. It's very important. So when we understand that connection, then we may be able to really understand a little bit more about healing emotionally by validating what we're feeling. Every day when we speak, we talk about the mind-body connection just in our general everyday speech, and we don't even realise that we're doing it. We say a lot of things, and one of them is something like, that person is a pain in the neck. And what we're doing is describing an emotion with a physical sensation. We're saying someone is a pain in the neck. Now, every time someone annoys us and irritates us, do we get an instant pain in the neck? No, we don't. But there was enough truth in that statement to make its way into our language. So we probably do notice that when someone annoys us and irritates us regularly, what do? We go, that person's getting to me, and we clench our jaw and we tighten our neck muscles. So we may find eventually that there are receptors for that emotion in the muscles in our neck. We also say things like, I feel like I've been kicked in the guts. And when we say something like that, are we just speaking arbitrary words, or do we feel it in our solar plexus? Normally when we describe feelings like that, we can feel it physically. We also say things like, I've got the weight of the world on my shoulders. And when we say that, again, we often feel burdened and heavy and weighed down, and you can see it in our posture. One of the areas that puts a lot of these correlations together is NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And NLP is a technique that helps us to get more in touch with the way we hold our body and how that affects our state of mind and how our state of mind affects our body. So with a good NLP practitioner, they can help you to become much more aware of how your posture, how you hold your body, the thoughts you think, the images you create in your mind affect your states. And again, then how you reinforce those states day to day. So by becoming more aware of how we use our body to reinforce our habitual states of mind, we can then break those patterns, and often a good practitioner will help with that. One person that really pioneered the NLP movement around the world was Anthony Robbins. And there's just a little exercise that I'll get you to do now, just so that you can understand the mind-body connection a little bit. So I'll get everyone to sit up really straight and tall. So feet flat, shoulders back, put your chin right up, and roll your eyes up and look at the ceiling. And while you're there, put a really big, silly, cheesy grin on your face. and now try and feel depressed. And it doesn't work, does it? So just relax. But just by doing that, it reinforces how we can affect our states of mind through our body. And you will really see that in depression. When someone is depressed, they're not just depressed mentally, you can see it in their whole body. They're often hunched over, their shoulders are slumped forward, their face is looking down, their eyes are downcast. They speak quite slowly and quietly. They often shuffle along. So you can see in their whole persona that they are depressed. So by using something like an NLP technique, what they will do is bring awareness to those postures, and just by throwing the shoulders back, putting the head up, eyes forward, speaking more quickly and walking more quickly, putting a smile on the face can affect our mood. So it's not a cure for depression, but becoming aware of our body is a really important part of learning how to heal, and heal emotionally as well as physically. Okay. One area that is of great interest and a lot of research is also being done is the area of the heart. Originally we thought that the heart was just a pump, pumping blood around the body. We also, back in time, they did think the heart was the brain. But when they did discover the brain, they just again assumed the heart was just a pump. But through heart transplant patients, we are finding that there is actually a lot of memory and emotion stored within the heart. And I wanted to read out a little bit of a story about that. There was a book in 1997 called A Change of Heart that did describe the personality changes in a heart transplant patient. And there was also another paper published that described 10 cases where changes occurred in the heart transplant recipients that correlated with memory from the donor. And it's quite a fascinating area. Okay, one of the cases out of that paper was where the donor was a 3-year-old boy who actually fell from an apartment window. The recipient was a 5-year-old boy who had septal defects and cardiomyopathy. The donor's mother reported, "We were at the hospital and we went up to the giving tree where you hand a token symbolising your donor. I was already crying when my husband told me to look at the table we were passing. It was the donor family with Daryl, the recipient, sitting there. I knew it right away. Daryl smiled at me exactly like Timmy, the donor, did. After we talked for hours with Daryl's parents, we were comforted. It somehow just didn't seem strange at all after a while. When we heard that Daryl had made up the name Timmy and got his age right, we began to cry. But they were tears of relief because we knew that Timmy's spirit was alive." The recipient, Daryl, a 5-year-old boy, reported, "I gave the boy a name. He's younger than me and I call him Timmy. He's just a little kid. He's a little brother like about half my age. He got hurt bad when he fell down. He likes Power Rangers a lot, I think, just like I used to. I don't like them anymore though. I wonder where my old heart went. I sort of miss it. It was broken, but it took care of me for a while." The recipient's father reported, "Daryl never knew the name of his donor or his age. We didn't know either until recently. We just learned that the boy who had died had fallen from a window. We didn't even know his age until now. Daryl had it just about right. Probably just a lucky guess or something, but he got it right. What is spooky though is he not only got the age right and some idea of how he died, he got the name right. The boy's name was Thomas, but for some reason his immediate family called him Timmy." The recipient's mother reported, "Are you going to tell him the real Twilight Zone thing? Timmy fell trying to reach a Power Ranger toy that had fallen on the ledge of the window. Daryl won't even touch his Power Rangers anymore." And that's not an isolated case. It's case after case where heart transplant recipients have memories and emotions that follow through from their donor. When we understand that the heart carries more memory and more emotion, we will find correlations with other parts of the body. They're now finding even kidneys and liver contain some memories that go forward into the transplant recipient. So when orthodox medicine embraces the fact that healing occurs from emotional memory and release of emotional memory, when they understand that these things are stored within our body, that our body isn't just made up of physical components, then we may have a paradigm shift in how we view healing. We are now looking at also the heart containing neurons or brain cells, and it's been speculated that the brain actually downloads information to these brain cells in the heart, and that the heart transmits information to the rest of the body via the bloodstream. So it's a fascinating theory, and I hope we see a lot more research in that area. Okay. When we're looking at healing, society sees physical injury and emotional injury in two very different ways. When we have a physical injury, it's straightforward. We know exactly what we need to do to heal. So for example, if we break our arm, we go off to the hospital. At the hospital we get assessed, they say you've broken your arm, you go to the orthopaedic specialist, they then do an in-depth analysis of what's happened, and then you get the treatment you require. And they give you a step-by-step program that if you do X, Y and Z, in 6 to 8 weeks you will heal and everything will be fine. Then people rally around and support you and say, oh, you poor thing, you broke your arm, let me cook dinner for you, let me pick the kids up from school because you can't do it. So there's a lot of support for people with a physical injury. However, if we have an emotional injury, the way society reacts and the way we heal is very, very different. We don't have an emotional injury hospital to rock up to check ourselves in and say, well, I've suffered this type of trauma, what do I need to do to heal? We just don't have that. Yes, we have psychology and psychiatry, but even those areas are quite taboo for most people. And then we have a look at the way society deals with emotional injury. It's get up, get over it, put a smile on your face, don't let life beat you down, don't be a sissy, don't be a wuss, just get over it. And that's not probably the best way to look after ourselves. If we understand that pushing emotions down and suppressing them can lead to damaging our body, we need to explore other ways of healing. So healing really becomes a very personal journey of self-exploration. And there's nothing that actually beats going within internally and looking for insight and ways to heal. There's no way of getting around it, unfortunately. So it does become a very personal journey. And it is about finding the right technique, the right therapist and the right program to be able to heal. And there is no set instructions. And what works for one person may not work for the other. And it can be like piecing a jigsaw puzzle together. There might be a couple of different techniques, practitioners or therapies that will help you to heal, but I may need another different set of techniques to allow myself to heal. So it does really become your own journey, but it's one very worth exploring. When we see emotions, or I have a great visual of emotions that someone described to me once, was that feelings or emotions are like helium balloons that are just wanting to rise up and be let go of. Now, what we often do is say, well, that's too dangerous to let go of, so let me hang on to that one and I'll hold it and push it down. And that might be all right for one big balloon of emotion. But if we have a lot of them, we might be trying to hang on to 200, 300, 1,000 different things that we're trying to suppress. And holding on to all of that takes an enormous amount of energy. So when we are ill, when we are fatigued, there is often something emotionally that we're hanging on to that we just don't want to let go of. And often we get caught up in the fact that we love to express how we really feel, but there's a lot of do's and don'ts around that. We think that if we express how we truly feel, then people won't like us anymore. Men aren't supposed to cry. Women are not supposed to get angry. We might think we're overreacting, or we shouldn't feel this way, or we might hurt someone's feelings. And a lot of those do's and don'ts and shoulds and shouldn'ts come in to not allow us to express our true feelings. So then we push them down and hold them in, and then we may find we end up with some type of illness, disorder or disease, or maybe not even a disease like that. Maybe we just don't live life to the fullest, to our full potential and capacity to live an enjoyable, happy, vibrant, healthy life. Maybe it's just an inhibition of that. But whatever it is, it does stop us from reaching our full health potential, physically and emotionally. When we view healing and we look at spontaneous healing, we look at people that have cured themselves from terminal illness, people that have lived long, healthy lives in spite of illness, accidents and disability, we often find that there is a component of cathartic emotional release within that healing. That the people have actually gone within, they have discovered traumas or deeply held feelings that have never been acknowledged and understood. And by doing different techniques or therapies, they access that, release it, and then their physical bodies are able to heal. So there's been many documented cases where that has happened. So especially when we are looking at vibrant health, we need to access that part of ourselves and see if we can release any damaging feelings or traumas that are held within. One lady that did this very successfully was a lady called Brandon Bays, who's written a book called The Journey. Now, Brandon was very big in the New Age industry, in personal development, and she was, by all accounts, a very fit and healthy lady. She actually worked with Anthony Robbins for quite a while, working on motivation and personal development. Now, Brandon one day started realising she was getting a bit of a potty belly. And so she thought, maybe I'm not exercising hard enough or eating well enough, and she stepped up her health regime. And her belly kept getting bigger and bigger. So she went into complete denial and just wore bigger and bigger shirts and pants. Until one day she started hemorrhaging. And she went off to the doctor, and the doctor said, Brandon, you have got a basketball-sized tumour in your uterus. If we don't do emergency surgery today, you are going to bleed to death. And Brandon said, oh, no, I'm sure I can heal myself. This is what I teach people. And the doctor said, you're crazy, you're bleeding to death right now. So Brandon coerced the doctor into giving her 24 hours to go away and stop the bleeding through natural means, which she did. She used homeopathic remedies, she used NLP techniques, and she stopped the bleeding. Then she managed to talk the doctors into giving her time to heal this basketball-sized tumour that was in her abdomen. So yes, she looked after the physical body. She did juice fasting, she did a lot of raw food, she did a lot of body work, she did herbal remedies, and she looked after the physical side of her body. But alongside of that, she also went in and she was able to access a trauma that she felt was held within this tumour that she had never dealt with from childhood. Once she understood what was happening in her body and released those feelings, all that brilliant physical work she was doing was able to really do its job, and her body was able to heal. So 6 weeks after Brandon was diagnosed with a basketball-sized tumour in her body, it had completely resolved. There was absolutely no sign of any tumour left whatsoever, which is a really powerful story about healing, cathartic emotional release and how it works with the body. So by really understanding what's going on within, by tapping into the messages that we hold within our body, it doesn't have to manifest as a basketball-sized tumour. But it can be simple things that we hold within that we need to access and release to achieve really good health. Now, Brandon also talks about the way we view ourselves, and she has a lovely story that she has written in her book, The Journey, about the way we often look at ourselves and put ourselves down. She says, I'd heard it said that when we are born, we come in as a pristine, pure, flawless diamond. And through the course of life, we dump a lot of emotional shit on top of it and obscure its natural brilliance and radiance. Then when we become adults, we paint varnish over it to make it appear shiny and presentable. All we've done is put a hard, polished veneer over a bunch of crap. But when we present it to the world saying, "This is who I am," we wonder why no one buys it. Then one day, if we're very lucky, through some act of grace, through a transformative seminar, a book, a crisis, a disease, or some other gift of life, we might have the great good fortune to break through and crack this brittle surface. Then for a while it might seem as if all we're doing is shoveling through the brown stuff. But eventually, underneath it all, we unearth a priceless diamond that has always been there, shining, pristine, pure, and exquisitely beautiful. We eventually realise that we've always been this flawless diamond, only we'd spent the whole of our lives thinking we were the stuff that obscured it. And often that is how we view ourselves. We don't understand that we are perfect beings within this body. We often don't access that inner perfection and express it to the world. There's enough people out there willing to shoot us down without doing it to ourselves. So exploring this area can be a very powerful tool for healing. And as I mentioned before, it becomes a very personal journey of self-exploration. And there are a myriad of ways to explore this area. So I'm not here to say what one works and what one doesn't, because it is very individual. But we can start with looking at techniques like NLP that helps you recognise the states of mind that you hold and the images and the postures that reinforce those states and start to change them. There are things like Brandon's The Journey work, where you can read the book, you can have CDs that take you through the steps to release emotions, or you can work with a journey practitioner. There are techniques like EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, tapping different acupuncture points while thinking of different emotions or traumas and allowing them to heal energetically. There's also another two in that area called TFT or TAT. There are things like biofeedback machines. There is EMDR, which uses eye movement techniques to access different feelings and emotions. There is things like body work that we can do. So a lot of those are on an energetic or a mental field. There's also body work. Yoga can be a wonderful tool for getting in touch with the body. Meditation can be very powerful. The power of prayer can work for many people. There is also massage can help. There's body electronics, body energetics, craniosacral work. There's an enormous field in emotional healing, karmic healing, spiritual healing, rebirthing. It's about finding the right practitioner and the right technique that works for you, where you feel you're really getting good insight into what's happening emotionally and within your body. Can be a very powerful thing to do. Okay. Now, one of the things that traditional counselling can do is actually help you change the meaning of different events. So traditional counselling can be wonderful for a lot of people, as long as there's a good practitioner that helps you to get to the meaning you've given to different events and to shift that. And I'll talk about that quite a lot now, because it's such a powerful thing to be able to do. Now, when we look at life, there is no absolute truth. And that's quite a powerful thing, and most people don't understand that. There is no absolute truth. There is only the truth that we give different events. There is only our truth or our perspective. So often we are looking at life through what I describe as our filter. So we're blinkered and we look at life through this filter. And that filter is made up of everything that has happened to us during our life. Even from the time we were in utero, we're laying down thoughts and belief patterns from our mother. Up to about the age of 7 years old, we're also taking on beliefs of everyone around us because we don't have the ability to discern whether those beliefs support us or not. Everything that happens to us in our family, at school, through our teenage years while we're growing up, through our work life, everything that happens to us, we give a meaning. And that meaning can be positive, it can be negative. But whatever meaning we give, we're laying down our filter. And that's what we view life through. So everyone has a very unique filter. Now, a lot of people would have what I describe as a cloudy filter. When they look at life through their filter, they see things from a point of judgment, of bitterness, of anger, of hatred, of jealousy, of greed, of any type of negative emotion. If they have not done any healing work to heal those negative feelings, then that's the way they view life. And you might see that if, even in simple circumstances, when you're in the checkout at the supermarket and the girl may be really slow. A person that has a cloudy filter that looks through a lot of anger may say to that girl, "You're in the wrong job, you shouldn't be doing this, go and do something else, you're useless." Another person behind them might have cleared some of that filter and be coming from the inner place of love and kindness and compassion, which is our natural state when we clear some of those layers off. Might look at the young girl and say, "Oh, she must be really new, isn't she trying hard?" And that event is exactly the same, but people view it in a different way, determined by their filter. So when we're trying to do something like deal with a trauma or deal with something that we have a lot of negative beliefs about, what we're often trying to do is change the meaning that we've given to that event. And by changing the meaning that we give an event, we can change the emotion that's attached to it, and we can feel differently. So if there is no absolute truth, then we may as well view things from a very positive perspective and give ourselves a little bit of a break. Now, I've got a great story about changing the meaning of events, and it's a true story that happened quite a few years ago. I was working with a young girl who was in her early 20s, and she was a very slim, very attractive, good-looking girl, and she was newly married. Now, her husband was a triathlete, and he used to do a lot of cycling. And one day she said to him, "Honey, wouldn't it be great if I had a bike and we could cycle together?" And he thought, "Great idea, honey, we'll have to do that." And then they promptly forgot about it. A couple of months later, it was her birthday, and the husband thought, "I know what I'll get my wife for her birthday." So he went out and bought a beautiful new shiny bike and a helmet and a water bottle, and very excitedly birthday morning presented her with the bike. Now, the meaning that this girl gave to the bike was, "My husband thinks I'm fat and I need to exercise more, so he mustn't love me." And what feeling do you think goes with that meaning? She came to work distraught. She was crying her eyes out, "My husband doesn't love me, he thinks I'm fat." Now, we can look at that and we can say, is that right or wrong? Or is that true? And you know what? It just doesn't matter, because it was true for her. And we don't know how she came at that meaning. We have no idea what's in her filter. We don't know if she might have gone through any type of trauma growing up that led her to feel very insecure about herself and unworthy of being loved. She might have had a mother that had a lot of body issue problems that pushed it onto her little girl. She might have been part of a peer group at school that thought you had to be anorexic to fit in. She might have any type of insecurity around her marriage. We don't know what led to that belief. But when we're in that pain, when we're in that distress, that's where we need to step back for a minute and look at what it is we're thinking and believing to give us that feeling. Because sometimes when we explore those things, they will lose their power when we understand it a bit better. Now, if that girl had maybe done some healing work, looked within, learned a little bit more of self-acceptance, of belief in herself, then she may have had a very different meaning when she was given the gift of the bike. She might have looked at that bike and said, "My beautiful husband remembered a comment I made a few months ago, and he bought me a bike because he wants to cycle with me so we can spend more time together because he loves me so much. Now, what feeling goes with that meaning? She would have been ecstatic. She would have come to work so happy. My husband bought me a bike because he wants to spend more time with me. Now, here we have two extremes of emotion, but the event did not change. The event was exactly the same. So if we can look at some of our past events and traumas and look at what it is that we believe around them, then we may be able to feel very different about those situations. So again, it's not right or wrong, it's just how we want to feel throughout our life and what perspective we want to give to those events. Now, a book that says this quite well is from Neil Donald Walsh, and he has a very interesting take on the fact that there is no right or wrong. And that's exactly what he says. There is no such thing as right and wrong. There is only what works and what does not work, depending upon what it is that you seek to be, do, or have. Right and wrong are figments of your imagination. They are judgments you are making, labels that you are creating as you go along. They are values that you are deciding upon depending on what it is that you want individually and as a society. When what you want changes, what you decide to call right and wrong changes. And that's quite interesting. If this girl had a goal of a long, healthy, happy marriage, then she would have to look at the meanings that she'd given around the gift and maybe address that in some way to heal so that she can achieve what she wants out of life. So it's not right or wrong, it's how you want to feel or be as you're getting where you want to go. Now, cultivating a positive attitude is a lot more than just saying a few pretty words in your mind and thinking that everything in life is going to turn out quite fine. There is a lot of truth in the power of positive thinking, but it's only one small tool in a huge toolbox of techniques that we can use to heal ourselves and live that free and liberated life. Now, nothing I talk about here during this talk is something that I haven't experienced. I've gone through most of those techniques and therapies because I had a lot of healing work to do myself, especially early on. When I was a teenager, I had quite a few traumas packed into just a short period of time. And after those traumas happened, I was left in a very, very dark place. I was really in despair and was really quite traumatised and didn't really care if I got better or not. And while I was in that phase in my life, my self-esteem was so low that I couldn't even make basic decisions on day-to-day things, let alone the big things. And one thing that used to happen regularly was in those making small decisions that I had such trouble with. And one I remember was that I needed shoes for a certain function. And I'd go to the shoe shop and I'd spend 2 or 3 hours there deliberating over what shoes to buy. Now, I've got no idea what the sales lady thought of me while I was trying shoes on, taking them off, trying them on again. But it would take me 2 or 3 hours to make a decision on shoes. Then I'd get home and look at the shoes and the self-talk would start, the negative self-talk. You're so stupid. How could you buy those shoes? They're completely wrong. Why can't you get anything right? And I'd be there tearing strips off myself for hours. The next day I'd take those shoes back to the store and get a refund because they were wrong, because I had no faith in my ability to make any type of decision. Then the next day I'd go back to the shoe store and buy the same damn pair of shoes because I needed shoes. So that's the kind of state that I was in during that time, where I had very, very little self-esteem and no ability to make a decision. I just didn't think that I could possibly make a decision that was correct. So around that time, somebody suggested to me that I read a book. So for the first time I went into the New Age section of the bookstore, and I didn't find the book that they recommended, but I found one called Affirmations by Stuart Wilde. And I picked it up and had a flick through, and it was written in a really blunt, down-to-earth, humorous style. And for some reason I actually bought the book. And even though it's terribly cliche, that book really did change my life. In that book, Stuart talks about affirmations, not just of thought, but of word, of feeling, and of action. So he's not talking about just saying a few pretty words. It really is following through in all areas of life. So that was when, the New Age movement was just starting to explode at the end of the 80s. And I took this book home and I started to explore what it said in there. And in there it talked about the first thing to do is monitor your own self-talk. Look at the negative thought patterns that are going round and round in your mind every day. So that's what I did, and I was absolutely blown away because I was totally vicious 24 hours a day. I didn't let up on my own self-talk. I was so negative and I was just tearing strips off myself all day. So the first thing I did was try and do what he said in there, and that is stop that self-talk and put an affirmation in place. So when you catch yourself doing it, you just say, nope, I'm not doing that anymore. And then we say an affirmation like, I love and accept myself just as I am. And for quite a while you feel like an absolute goose saying it and you don't believe a word of it. But by being consistent with it and pulling yourself up every time you have those negative thoughts, over time something shifts. And for me something really changed. And those becoming more positive in my thinking about myself, that opened that door a crack for me to step through and want to heal. And I had a lot of healing to do. So being, like I said, the end of the 80s, I just immersed myself in that whole healing industry. So I read hundreds of books. I saw counsellors, I saw emotional healers, I saw spiritual healers. I meditated, I did group therapy, I did rebirthing, I went to workshops, seminars, retreats, you name it. I went right into it. And through that time, what it did was it allowed me to really get a new perspective on the things that I'd been through, and to be able to really heal those truly and to drop that baggage. And we know that you've done a good job with that when those things, even when you think about them, they're a memory, but they hold no emotional charge. So when I talk about different things that happened to me as a teen, it doesn't matter anymore. There's no charge with it. So for me, I feel like they have fully healed. So I don't feel like I'm carrying that around. And I often say to people that really I'm just lazy. I don't want to drag all that junk around with me all the time. Another thing that we often do is we give something a value judgment. Now, a value judgment is where we say a situation is good or bad and we feel accordingly. So it's usually great big situations and we just say good or bad. We don't go into it, we just feel accordingly. And there's a great proverb that I'll probably get quite wrong, but you'll get the idea of what I mean. The saying is that there was once a poor farmer who was very wise, and one day a cow wandered onto his property. And because no one claimed the cow, he got to keep it, and that was a bounty for his family. The neighbour came over to the farmer and said, "Oh, you now have a cow. That is a very, very good thing." And the wise farmer just said, "Is good is bad? I don't know, it just is." The next day, the cow kicked the farmer's son and broke his leg. And the neighbour comes over and says, "Oh, that cow kicked your son and broke his leg. Very, very bad thing to have happen." And the wise farmer says, "Is good is bad? I don't know, it just is." The next day, the military comes through the small village and takes all the young men off to war except for the farmer's son. And the neighbour comes by and says, "Oh, very, very good thing that your son wasn't taken off to war." And the wise farmer again just says, "Is good, is bad? I don't know, it just is. And we can take a great learning from that, because we often don't have enough knowledge to know if a situation is good or bad. We really have no idea where life is heading. So again, we can save ourselves some distress if we stop labelling situations as good or bad. And I have a great example of this that was just hit home to me not long ago. And about 10 years ago, I was working for a company where I had a lot of my identity invested in it. I wanted to move up in this company and do really well, and I took on more and more responsibility, wanting to do really well. Now, the lady that was directly above me, instead of seeing us move through the company like that, she saw me going like this, and it became a very bullying situation at work. Now, I didn't have the skills then that I might now in dealing with it differently. So what I did was label it as a very bad situation that I then tried to fix. So I would go to work every day and try really hard to stop the whole bullying thing that was going on. But I couldn't. Every day I'd go home crying my eyes out because it was totally demoralising to be working in that situation. But I had a lot of beliefs around it. I thought that if I left this job, then I was a loser, I was a failure, I couldn't cut it in the corporate world. And I had all of these beliefs around it, so I just labelled it as really bad, tried to fix it, and caused myself enormous distress. Now, a lady that had worked at the company but had left because of a similar situation called me and said, "Leisa, there's a job going at the company I work for. You'd be perfect for it. Why don't you come and apply?" And I said, no, I can fix this. And so I kept on going. And it got to the point where I was crying at lunchtime and at the end of the day. It just got worse. About 6 or 8 weeks later, this lady called back again and said, "Leisa, that job was filled. The girl didn't work out. The job's up again. Please, will you come and apply for it?" And at that point, I gave up. I just said, "No, okay, I'm a failure. I'm a loser. I can't cut it. I'll have to leave." And it was all very bad. Now, when I went for the interview for the other job, the man that interviewed me for that job is now going to be my husband. Is good, is bad? We don't know. It just is. If I had have had a little bit of that knowledge or that learning, I might have been able to step back and just flow a little bit more gently, rather than put myself through such distress around that situation. And I only just realised that quite recently, which was interesting. A lady that's done some great work in the thought patterns that we have and the way we believe in our thoughts is a lady called Byron Katie. She wrote a book called Loving What Is. And in her book she says that when we fight with reality, we lose, but only 100% of the time. She said, when we're thinking, we have two options. We're either believing in our thoughts or we're questioning them. And by believing in our thoughts without question, we can cause ourselves a lot of heartache and a lot of distress because our thoughts are not necessarily truth. Now, in her book, she has a fantastic written exercise that takes you through 4 different questions that you use to question your thoughts, especially if you're in a stressful situation. And in one of these talks, I had a lady here who had a problem with her father. And what had happened was that her father would never call her. She always had to call him. And she was getting to the point where she was really upset and angry around this. So we actually used the 4 questions to have a look at what thoughts she was thinking to give her all the upset. So what we did was get her to write down what she felt around the situation. So she wrote down, "My father never calls me, so he mustn't love me. I'm really angry and upset about this, and I don't want to have to call him myself all the time." So she put down the judgment, which is the first stage of the work that Byron Katie does. So the first thing we do is we look at that and we say, is that true? So what she's saying is that if her father doesn't call her, he doesn't love her. Now, is that true? Now, we can never know the thoughts and motivations of another person, ever. So essentially, the statement that she wrote down there, we cannot know that that is true. So the first part of the awareness is knowing that she is actually believing in what is ultimately a lie. The next thing we ask is, how do you feel when you believe that thought? And how she feels when she believes that her father doesn't call her, so he mustn't love her. She's angry, she's upset, she's hurt, she's frustrated. That's what she feels when she believes what we've already just established is a lie. Now, what we do is get the person, and what we did in this situation is she sat and just became really still and closed her eyes and went within for a moment and imagined what would happen if she could not think that thought, if it was impossible for her to believe that if her father didn't call her, he didn't love her. And by going within, what she found was that if she couldn't think that thought, she would think, I haven't talked to my dad for a while, and she would pick up the phone and call. And that is the gift that she would give to herself, and that's the truth underneath when you take away the thought that she was believing in. The next part of it is to turn the statement around 180 degrees and see if the new statement is true or more true than the original. So in that case, what we did is turn it around and said, when my father doesn't call me, I don't love him. Now, when this lady's father didn't call, how did she feel? She was hurt and angry and upset. In that moment, was she loving her father? And you'd have to say no. So in that instance, the last statement, where we turned it around, was more true than the original statement. So that's not to apportion blame or to start going into guilt or judgment. What it is to find a new perspective on the thoughts that you're thinking. And that can be very powerful. And by doing these exercises again and again and becoming familiar with the process of questioning our thoughts, it becomes much more automatic. So when we start getting upset over something, we can immediately go, hang on, what am I thinking here to make me upset? And then we can do a few of the exercises and see if we can turn it around to gain a new perspective on it. When we do that, what we're actually doing is taking responsibility for our actions in the world. And the word responsibility can be broken up into the ability to respond. So we stop reacting. We stop having people push our buttons. And that's where, if we've cleared that cloudy filter and we don't have the layers of anger and judgment and bitterness, that's where we can come from within our natural state, which is love, kindness, compassion, joy and gratefulness. Those things come naturally when we clear some of those negative layers. And by doing that, we just step a little bit more gently in the world with ourselves and with the people around us. At this talk one morning, I had not talked about myself very much. And after the talk, a lady came up to me and she got right up in my face and had the finger pointing and everything and said, "Who do you think you are to give that talk? You look like a girl who's never had a trauma in her whole life." Now, because I've cleared a lot of my cloudy layers away, what I was able to do was respond to the lady rather than react. So what I did was take a breath, and then I said to her, "Thank you so much for that comment. Because if I look like a girl who's never had a trauma in her whole life, then geez, I've done some good healing work." Now what that did, and it wasn't fake, it was a different perspective on what the lady had said. Now by doing that, what we did was open the door to a dialogue which allowed her to express the fact that she'd been through some terrible things in her life and she was now in the process of healing it, but she couldn't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. By knowing that I'd been through similar things, and been out the other side and was living a very happy life, she took a lot of heart from that. And by doing that, she realised that she too would be able to heal, and it became a really positive interaction. Now, if I had gotten up in her face and said, well, if you only knew what I'd been through, what would that have done for either of us? It would have been quite an awful confrontation, and it wouldn't have helped anyone. So by being able to take responsibility for ourselves and the way we deal with ourselves and with others, we're able to create a much more positive environment around ourselves. Okay. By doing that, we don't know how far the ripples move out. We look at the world and we think, my goodness, it is in such a mess. What can I possibly do to fix the world? And one thing that we all can do is to heal ourselves. If we heal ourselves and we become a shining example of love and compassion and kindness, if everyone did that, we would have a different world. And we don't know how far what we do affects the others around us. By me doing the healing work that I did, especially early on, I was able to rebuild a relationship with my mother that was terribly damaged. Now, by doing that and now having a wonderful relationship with my mum, how far does that move out? By us having a very positive relationship, how does that allow her to be more positive with her friends and with other members of her family? We don't know how far it moves out. So if we can heal ourselves, if we can look after ourselves and then project that onto others, we can create a change within the world which we may not see in any other way. There's nothing more powerful than actually healing ourselves. With Neil Donald Walsh, and I've mentioned a couple of times the Conversations with God books, people often ask me, how do these concepts fit in with the religion that I belong to? And I'll let him answer that because he has a lovely take on it and on developing a new spirituality. He said, if we do embrace these type of concepts, human beings will stop trying to figure out which is the right text and which is the right messenger, and will simply look closely to see which text and which messenger speaks to them in a way that makes it possible for them to express and experience their connection to the divine, and to understand the great mysteries and great wonders of life. Humans will also stop trying to convince others that the messenger and the text that has touched their heart is the only one that people should turn to. He also says, our opportunity now is to create the space of possibility for a new spirituality to emerge upon the earth, a kind of spirituality that will not in any way hinder or destroy our traditional faith traditions, but that will reinvigorate them, refresh them, enliven them, expand them, and allow them to flourish, bringing to our world at last an individualised experience of the divine in a unified form that makes no one wrong for the way in which they are approaching the God of their understanding, and that creates no condemnation or conflict in God's name, which is a really interesting concept. Another book that talks along those lines is Anastasia. And there's a series of books written about a Siberian recluse. And in here, she also says, when your heart is stirred by something someone says, claiming to speak in the Father's name, take a look at how the preacher lives his own life, and then imagine what the world would be like if everybody started to live that way. So in that case, would we have a world of joy and of love and of tolerance? Or would we have a world where people had to be right at the cost of peace? And I think that's a very important concept to embrace and to understand. Now, just to finish, I would like to read out a poem by one of my very, very favourite authors, Araya Mountain Dreamer. She wrote a poem called The Invitation, and it's actually a call for us to live our lives more authentically. So I'll just share that with you. The Invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the centre of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have become shrivelled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself, if you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul, if you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty, even when it's not pretty, every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand on the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the centre of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Araya has one question that she says we all need to ask at the very end of our life, and it's the only important question, and that is, have I loved well? So I will finish there, and I'd like to say thank you for listening, and I hope that those concepts that we've talked about today help you to understand that real, true healing embraces more than just the physical body, and exploring our inner selves can create a wonderful life and health in all areas. So thank you.